Hi, I'm Ashley Brown, and I'm Executive Director of the Women's Resource Center of Manatee. We're having a special series of A Woman's Place called Life After 50. I'm joined again by Dr. George Schofield. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me. And we've brought a wonderful additional guest.
Absolutely. My friend and colleague, Jerry Detweiler, who is an expert in personal finance and credit. And from my standpoint, she's the intelligent voice of credit.com, the fabulous personal finance website.
Welcome, Jerry.
Thank you.
So that's a pretty impressive, it almost rivals yours, George, on panelist, futurist, author, but a little intimidating to people. People probably don't love talking about the personal finance and credit, do they?
I find that everyone has a credit story, right? So everybody has something that at some time goes wrong, a mistake on their credit report, a problem with their credit card, and sometimes they're serious problems, debt problems, and that's been a huge issue for so many people, including in our area over the past 5 years. But there are great resources out there and available, so my goal is to help people find them and reduce some of that stress.
Awesome. Well, and yes, there's the college years where you think if you have checks, you have money. Didn't everybody go through that? Is that just me? One of the things that George and I started talking about on our last show was really looking at adaptability and transition and things that happen. And we talked about the fact that truly, I think all of us are aware that we need to be saving for the future, saving for retirement, saving for the unexpected. But the reality is, we're often hit with completely unexpected, maybe an illness, what happened to the real estate market in our area.
Job change. What kinds of things, Jerry, do people really have to be alert to after 50? What are some of the major opportunities and what are some of the major problem areas for people?
Well, debt is a huge issue, and especially when you get older and you're thinking about making a transition to either retiring or maybe working in a different field or working less than you used to and having fewer hours. What we're seeing is we are seeing an increase in debt problems at older ages. So we are seeing more student loan debt for older Americans, which includes their own debt as well as debt they may have co-signed for their children or their grandchildren. We're also seeing increasing bankruptcies for older consumers. So there are a lot of credit issues that confront everyone, but are particularly difficult when you're older and you feel like perhaps your highest peak earning years may not be there, and so you want to figure out, how do I get rid of this debt so I can afford to do what I really want?
Right, and there's also a growing number of divorces, I think, as people are getting older, which is really throwing all kinds of waves toward people who don't see it coming.
Absolutely, and a big impact on your credit. You're right.
And the people that are connecting with you, are they at a place where it's the overwhelmed, I don't know where to turn, and here's my mess? Or do you see people connecting earlier? Is it usually in distress when they're connecting with credit.com?
Well, we actually see the range, because one of the things we do at credit.com is we give consumers their free credit score. So some people are just coming because they're curious. Some people know their credit's good. They just want to keep tabs on it, make sure they're not identity theft victims. And then other people are coming because they know there's an issue and they need to address it. So there's a large range. Unfortunately, sometimes there's a surprise. You check your credit and you discover, oh, wait, I didn't know there was this medical collection account. I thought I took care of my medical bills when I was in the hospital. Or, oh, I didn't know that loan I co-signed for my grandkid never was repaid, and now it's on my credit report. So that's one of the reasons why it's so important to be cognizant and stay in touch with what's going on with your credit.
And if you were one of the things, again, to the Women's Resource Center, we talk about what we know. We see many people coming to us with the unexpected job loss that George talked about. And if you weren't planning to lose your job and lose your source of income, what type of resources are available, or how would you handle that situation?
This is a really key time to be very in tune with your budget, your credit, and your spending, because here's the mistake that I see. People will get into trouble, and most people that I talk with feel very responsible. They want to pay their bills. They know they took out the debt. They want to repay it. But the mistake they make, there's two mistakes. One is that they will tap their retirement money to pay unsecured debts when they really can't afford to. Retirement money generally in your 401k, your IRA, your pension is generally protected from creditors in Florida. So if you cash in that money, it's gone. And most of us need every penny that we save for retirement at a time when we may not be able to work or may not be able to work much or produce much income. So instead of that, what I would prefer to see is someone reaching out for help, whether it's a credit counseling agency, the Women's Resource Center, Gulf Coast Legal Services provides a terrific resource in this community, getting some help and advice before they pull that money out of retirement to pay credit cards and other bills. The other big mistake, I think, is that about more than half of us don't have a budget. And so we don't really know what's essential spending and what's not essential spending. And if you don't know that now, it's going to be more critical when you run into a problem, because then you really have to prioritize. You really have to start thinking about, okay, what do I really absolutely have to spend my money on? What can wait? What can I postpone? What creditors can I work with and maybe work out a repayment plan with that medical provider or the dentist or someone I owe money to? But you have to be in touch with your budget in order to do that, because if you don't, then what happens is you pull out the plastic, right? So you pull out the plastic to fill in the gaps, and next thing you know...
it's only one time.
Exactly. That's our thought process, right?
Right.
It's short-lived. I'll get back on my feet. And then suddenly you have this credit card debt you're dealing with on top of the fact that you may take a lower paying job, or you may not have the same benefits that you had at your old job.
And I think there are a couple of pieces that match with that. Not only do you have to have a budget, but I think it's a good idea for people to use QuickBooks or some other software and download their expenses and code them in effect, so you can see what you're spending on a daily, weekly, monthly basis in comparison to your budget. And it's not an expensive process to do, but I think it's very informative. The other thing that I'm worried about, in addition to people sort of just tracking where their money's going and having the budget, is, are they really tracking where their employer is going? Because historically, employment means we have outsourced that part of our lives to our employers. We've outsourced our careers, we've outsourced our financial futures, in many ways, our employability, the currency of our skills. And I think it's really important for people in this day and age to understand that after 50, it's up to them, and their employers can't be more responsible for them in the long run than they are themselves.
And you're not talking just about a matching retirement fund. You're talking about, how's the company doing? Are you seeing any changes? Are you seeing cutbacks?
Is it up for sale?
Right. And I think that the ostrich theory, a lot of people connect with that of, if I just bury my head in the sand and pretend like this isn't happening, maybe it'll go away. And so I think that that's good, because I think that we do get in that automatic. So being engaged and aware. And I to your point, Jerry, on the personal responsibility, I do think that a lot of people want to pay and want to take care of, but reaching out for help is so hard. It's taking that step to say, I might not be able to solve this on my own. I'm going to use all my savings. I'm going to use all of this. But the willingness to reach out. And maybe that's step one if you do lose your job and you don't have an immediate replacement coming up, to connect with someone to say, give me some guidance on where I should go.
It is. And the research has found that when we're under financial stress, our IQs go down and we make worse decisions. We don't make as good of decisions.
Really?
Yeah, the research is there. So that's why it's so important when you're under this stress, because losing a job is up there near the top in terms of, or even a major change like that, a divorce or anything that throws your life in a financial tailspin, throws you into financial stress, and you aren't going to make as clear decisions in that kind of situation. So finding a place that is not going to judge you, but is there to help you and to help you work through it is so crucial. And I can't tell you how many people I've spoken with over the years who could have been in such a better place if they had just reached out to a credit counseling agency, reached out to somewhere like the Women's Resource Center to get help, but instead, under stress, they made decisions that in hindsight were not the best in terms of their long-term financial health.
Well, and that is such interesting data. And you see it with people when you're in that stressful situation, that you're not making the best decisions, and you don't want to connect with your family or your friends and see,
Or a situation in which you're going to be embarrassed.
embarrassed. Yes, your pride comes up there pretty quickly, especially if you've lost a job and that maybe you're feeling a bit defensive about that in the first place. So interesting.
But there is confidential help available too, right? So credit counseling agency, that's confidential. Even a bankruptcy attorney. Most people don't want to talk to a bankruptcy attorney, but the time to talk to one is before you really need it. You know,
Right.
it's when you are trying to make these big decisions about, should I cash in that 401k, or am I going to have to lose my home? Am I not going to be able to keep it? That's the time to talk to them so you can plan and have more options.
So on bullet points right now, we have create a budget, always. No matter if you think you need one or not.
Right.
And understand.
And track your expenses against the budget on a regular basis.
Well, that's no fun, George.
I know, but
But it can be fun, right?
it's not supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be effective.
No, and there can be great apps now that will help you do this. You can go online with Mint, Betterment, Personal Capital. There's all kinds of sites, free. They'll set up pretty pie charts and graphs and, like you said, apps on your phone that will help you do this. So this is not slaving over a spreadsheet every
Right.
single night anymore.
And if you find that 75% of your expenses go to entertainment, maybe you need to cut back on that, George? Is that what you're-
Possibly. Or you need to be more honest about what entertainment is.
Or cook dinner at home every once in a while, some of those things. But so I think that's interesting, and protecting the 401k, your SEP, your IRA, whatever your retirement is. And looking at the career piece, George. So I've lost my job. I'm 60 years old. What do I do?
Well, it depends on what your skills are. So I think one of the things that people need to do the whole time they're employed is understand consciously what their skills are and what the marketplace is looking for. So even if you think there's no chance of losing your job, it still would be important, simply like saving money and simply like riding your bicycle to take care of your health. It's proactive to go out and acquire some additional skills so you have them to fall back on should you need them. I actually think there's another piece to this, which is there's some new data that says that, as I said, I think in a previous show, that the happiest people who are retired have 3 income streams. They have their savings, they have Social Security of some sort, but they also have some other kind of income stream from work, whether they own a business or they have a part-time job. I think around 50 is the time to begin to do career planning for some other part-time activity that you'd begin to do then that would build into something that we would really do close to full-time or half-time anyway later on after you've retired.
And that's creating that constant stream of income
Right.
into your 70s, 80s, and God willing, 90s.
Absolutely.
in-
Healthy 90s.
Healthy 90s, yes. And when you're talking with people, Jerry, I think another piece that we go through is not wanting to take a job that's not good enough. That's not I was making $200,000 a year, which I am not, just for the record. And I'm certainly not going to take a job that's $100,000, and maybe I'm reporting to someone younger than I am or any of that. So I'm sure you deal with some of those aspects as well.
Well, that's been a reality for a lot of our economy over the past few years. So a lot of people have found themselves either displaced or accepting much lower pay, and sometimes for more work than they used to
Yes.
be doing.
Yes.
But ultimately, I hope that folks will be able to protect the assets that they have to the extent that they can, continue, like George said, to find a satisfying form of income, in whether it's a small business of your own or a side business or some sort of part-time work that maybe is less stressful than that $200,000 a year job was, right? Maybe doesn't require as much travel or whatever it was you didn't like about that particular position. But to protect yourself from the debt that can accumulate very quickly if you are not earning enough income. And ultimately, that's where debt does come from, right? Is we don't have the income to buy what we need, and so we turn to credit cards, auto loans, mortgages, or even student loans.
Well, or to buy what we think we need that we don't really need, because there's a piece of discipline here. One of the things I think is true, and Jerry can weigh in here, is if you're 60, you don't have the number of recuperative years you had when you were 25.
Right.
You don't have so many years to dig yourself out of a credit hole. So intelligent decisions at 60, I think, are even more important, just because you don't have so many years left over, as intelligent credit decisions at 30.
And one of the things I touched on a moment ago that is a really big issue for the older generation right now is getting saddled with other family members' debts. And so whether it's a child who's moved back home or one who needs you to co-sign the car because they lost their car and they can't qualify, or student loan debt, et cetera, it's a very risky proposition. If you can afford to do it and you can afford to pay that entire debt, then fine. You can do that. You can help someone out. But it does become, once you co-sign, that debt becomes your debt.
Yes.
Period. You are completely responsible for it. And anything that happens with that account is your responsibility and stays on your credit. And I can tell you right now that if the other person isn't paying, there's no chance you're going to get taken off that loan.
Right.
It's not a year or two thing. It's until that loan is paid off and closed that you're responsible.
And I think whether it's connecting with credit.com, the Women's Resource Center, Gulf Coast Legal, whether it's connecting with a career specialist, finding accurate information. The amount of misinformation that goes on under the premise of goodwill. I mean, typically it's a friend or a family member or someone that, well, Jerry told me that I had this piece of paper signed by my son saying they would pay me back. So that means the debt's not mine. And so I think that there's so much misinformation. So researching and finding out from an outside source or an expert and getting an unbiased perspective, I think is so important. Educating yourself on what really happens. Because I do think when you're faced with that, will you co-sign with me? And it's your grandchild or your child, it's hard to say no.
It's very hard to say no. And so you have to think about what alternatives are there. If they're trying to rebuild their credit, could you help them get a secured credit card? If they need a car, maybe you help them buy a very inexpensive car that they make do with until they are on their feet and can finance a car. Or maybe you lend them the money for the payments, but you're not on the loan. You know, that's the key, is once your name is on the loan, you're responsible. And so you do have to make that decision going in eyes wide open. And again, if you can afford to do it and you could afford to pay back that loan if things go bad, then that's one decision. But when you can't afford it and you do it, that's a really tough place to put that person.
Also, it's possible you can afford to do it when you've signed and something will happen later that will really put you in a bind. So we're certainly not saying don't try to help out your children and your grandchildren. I think the line is, to what degree does it put you and your future at risk? And not just given what's now, but with the potential risks that you're going to have just by living your life. I think it's really important for people to do a risk assessment and really use the risk yardstick as opposed to the pure kindness yardstick.
Well, and interesting is we're talking about this topic, the number of women we see 65 looking to, can I retire? They've often put everyone else's financial needs before their own. And not saying that men don't do this, but I think there's a higher percentage of women that will be, do the kids have what they need? Or let's make sure they have the clothes they need, or let's give them something extra, grandkids. And then they find that they don't have the funds available to live without creating additional sources of income. Or, as George, we were talking before we started taping, if you're looking to retire at 75 with $1 million in the bank, which presumably, if nothing bad happens, could take you into your 90s, how much additional money are we going to have to save a year to make that happen?
If you're 50 and you haven't started saving and you're going to retire at 75 and need $1 million, you're going to have to save $40,000 a year between 50 and 75. So you have that million to live on, between 75 retirement and your death at 95.
Yeah, which is a pretty significant amount of money.
How many of us can save $40,000 a year every year
Right.
for 25 years?
I know. I mean, that's a stark reality. So we find people in that situation. So I think asking yourself that question of, how does this impact my financial future going forward, before you make that decision? And it's not about loving or not loving somebody. It's about putting yourself first from a security standpoint.
So, Jerry, as the head of consumer education for Credit.com, how do you break through that? Who shows up willing to learn, and how do you help the other people learn how to take a much more business-like approach to this part of their lives?
Well, one of the things I'm seeing lately that I think is really fun is this movement toward frugality. And it's not that you have, frugality kind of has a bad name and people think of pinching pennies, and there is that segment of it, but there's also a lot of fun experiments that are going on. And the time to do this kind of thing is before you have to do it, before you're in a financial crisis. And some examples are women who are deciding they're going to pick 10 pieces of clothing and only wear those for a month, in a goal to try to say, okay, what do I really, really need? Or there's a movement of people who are trying to pare down their items to 100 items, or having a
like in your whole house.
100 items. I know. I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it, but I don't know what I have,
Where would I
1,000?
start?
I don't know. But or there's folks who are saying, okay, I'm going to go and not spend anything this weekend, or one weekend a month, or I'm not going to spend anything on Fridays. Spend no money on Fridays, or whatever day you choose. The idea is that you're sort of having fun with this idea of, okay, where can I take this? Like, what really matters to me? What's really important? And it forces us to think differently. And that's a lot of what you talk about, George, is looking at things in a new way. And doing that when you're not under stress is so much easier, when it's fun and it's an experiment, it's a game, and it's not essential.
And you can do it together.
Right.
Get your friends, get your partner, get anyone,
Right.
family involved.
Right. Well, that's a very smart idea.
My daughter is 15, and every year I've tried to sort of bring sanity to the holiday season, and she's kind of glared at me with this, no, I want my gifts, right? But this year I said to her, honey, let's think about what we really have enjoyed out of the holidays. And now she's old enough, I said, you pretty much get what you need during the year. So let's think about experiences. And now she's at an age where we can start talking about that. So maybe that's a discussion for your family. If you find yourself spending a ton of money at the holidays for grandkids and the whole family, maybe instead it's an experience that you decide to create. And I know, George, you do this with your grandkids. You create experiences with them. And that's another way to approach it.
We're having that very conversation on, because there is a certain time where you get that you have the things you need, or you don't need other things. So why go crazy or have people buy you gifts that is stress for everyone? So I think that's great, especially going into the holidays, of having those conversations and not breaking down in tears, George, when you don't get everything you want
This
for
has actually been an
Christmas.
education for me, because my wife Linda is much less sort of centered around gifts than I am. So I feel a lot of pressure, for instance, to buy things for her birthday that she doesn't create. I created, and over the years she slowly wound me down. So it isn't maybe 6 gifts, it's just one. I think she'd be happy just if we went out to dinner, to tell you the truth. But it's really my drive to buy things for her that's driven it, not her need. And I've had to learn to adjust that in myself.
Which is good. And I want to kind of, as we're wrapping up, make sure that we go over some of the the highlights that we discussed. One, and most importantly, reach out before you need help. Wherever you are in your life right now, take a look at where you are financially, budget-wise, and know what's on your credit report. And how do you go about doing that?
Well, certainly we're happy to help at credit.com. In addition, there is the federally mandated free credit report website. It's annualcreditreport.com. That's the government mandated site to get your free credit report from all 3 bureaus once a year. There are great credit counseling agencies that can help for someone in distress. The Women's Resource Center, you have classes and assistance that's invaluable. And again, the time to get it is when you're not in a crisis, but then you're there in a crisis as well. And then in our community, Gulf Coast Legal Services serves Sarasota and Manatee County, and they really can help if someone, for example, is in danger of losing their home or being sued for a debt.
And then I think, George, to your point, looking at creating that budget and looking at your expenses and being engaged in that process.
Right. And also paying attention to, even though you're well employed and you don't expect to have a change, it's really intelligent investment in yourself to take a look at what other skills you might need should you have an involuntary change in your employment, and begin to work with that as you go along.
And stay engaged with what's going on
And
with
stay
your
engaged,
company.
yeah, absolutely.
And which is important. One of the things that I think is always interesting when you're in your 20s and kind of struggling to make every penny, or if something bad happens and you find yourself with your credit score not being where you want it to, that's when everything costs more as well. To borrow money, it's more, your insurance is more, to buy a car, it's more. I mean, so everything gets compounded, and there are some resources within the community. I know Manatee Community Credit Union, I think that's what it's called, we'll make sure, they have an affordable car program. So you don't have to get into those situations. The check cashing places, those things that, that people fall into to make smart decisions and reach out for help. And for women in particular, I think we don't want to have those uncomfortable conversations, and we need to. We need to know where money's coming from, where it's going, what our expenses are, and take a real active part in our financial future for sure. So reach out and connect.
Yes, and I'm glad you mentioned the credit unions, and we have some great community banks in our community as well that are offering alternative financial services so that people don't rely on just payday loans. The title loans on their cars, which are incredibly expensive and can basically force you to lose your car in the long run, and some of those other services that can be really drain families' limited financial resources at a time when they really need it.
Excellent. Well, you've been wonderful, and you've
Thank
given
you.
me some great food for thought. Thank you for joining us. And
Indeed.
yes,
Thank you, Jerry.
Absolutely.
It's our pleasure.
And next time, we're going to talk about what is the difference between being self-employed and an entrepreneur. We all talk about the entrepreneurial spirit, so we're going to look at some interesting ways to maybe connect a passion to your financial success.
And we're going to talk to a lady who's made a success of it.
Absolutely. So thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Life After 50.